everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. I am out in Santa Barbara training for the X-Alps. Left our snowy Sun Valley for a month, actually out here. The flying is really good, and I had no idea how amazing this community was, how deep the flying is. Man, it makes Sun Valley look pretty mellow, and how great the flying is. And I've been really dying to talk to Rob Sporrer, who runs Eagle Paragliding. He was there in the very beginning when I first started learning to fly in 2006. He's been at this game since the mid-90s, and he has helped build just an extraordinary community out here. So I was really psyched to sit down with him last night and do a live show. Those are always real special. So I think you're going to really enjoy this. We talk about risk management and training and how to build a really solid community like they have here. Told some great paragliding stories and some fun history there and stuff, but a lot of takeaways here, a lot of lessons regardless of where you're at. Talk about the X-Alps a little bit, but really helped me kind of bring my mind back to the important stuff like the fundamentals. And anyway, just a solid community. If any of you have not flown out here in Santa Barbara and in this zone, put it on your list. It's a proper hidden gem, just gorgeous place, right on the ocean, but big mountain flying right behind it, and you can do some super impressive things. So I'm really enjoying that. I don't have a lot of housekeeping. We still have not done the brought it across from Patreon. I've said in the last couple shows that we're eventually here going to leave Patreon and do our own subscription service through the website and save you a little bit of fees, a little bit of money on the fees, but it's and put it more on us. But it's a bigger transition than I realized, and you need really solid internet to do that. And I'm out here camping and got to go to the library for stuff like that, so I just haven't had time. So we will get that brought across, but for now, just stick where you are and keep enjoying the shows, and that will happen here in the coming weeks, and I'll let you know when it does. So those of you on Patreon can switch over. So that's it. That's all I got. Today is the first day of the super final down in Baixo Guandu. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but down in Brazil. It looks beautiful. So follow the PWC's website and their app and watch the fast, fun, furious racing down in the super final. It's 10 straight days. Should be great. Yeah, let's enjoy this show. So please enjoy this talk with Rob Sporrer, the head of Eagle Paragliding. Rob, I am stoked to be here with you in your little place, man. This is awesome, and I've had such a killer couple weeks in Santa Barbara, so we're going to talk about the specialness of this place. But so firstly, just thank you. It's a real honor to come here and talk to you, man. I mean, you were the man in the very beginning of my, having things changed. It's crazy, so cool. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. It's a huge effort. I don't know how you find the time to do all you do, but this is something that everybody appreciates.
Burning midnight oil, man.
Yeah, no, we're happy to have you. It was fun watching you and Revis send it out there yesterday. The whole community was checking it out.
That was cool. Yeah, we're going to get into your community. And, we just talked a lot about your history. We're going to get into some of that and just Eagle and the instructing and just how this all came to be. But I thought a really good way to pull people in right off the bat is to have you tell us a paragliding story. It doesn't have to be paragliding, it can be hang gliding, it can be whatever. But you've been at this a long time. I'm sure you've got some stories to tell. What's something that just sparks out? It doesn't have to be your own flying story either. It could just be like something you saw, something that you still think back on and go, man, that was crazy.
Yeah, it seems like the best stories I've had I've been flying with my friends and, flying all the comps. And so there's so many stories. Dad, I'm getting chased by the it wasn't an emu, but it was one of those animals after landing, and just some crazy stuff. But I remember landing after a task in Chelan, and all the retrieve vehicles were gone. It was getting dark. It was after one of those big ones where we headed east, and I was able to talk to one of the locals. And we went to the preacher's house, and we commandeered a short bus to get back to Chelan. So there's a lot of great stories from the comps, but one of them was from Dunlap flight at a competition years ago, and it was with a lead gaggle, and we were kind of thermaling, and it all got kind of hairy, and I kind of bailed out of the thermal, and I got real low and stuck and barely got back up. And then little Pete cruised up, and we were kind of, hey, bud, so we went cruising. We ended up flying, and we weren't really racing. We were just kind of cruising. And, we got to climb, and we're like, yeah, we think we got gold. Let's go. And so we started on glide, and Dave Hanning had kind of been there with us too. And he separated, went a different way. And we figured that, we were hopefully just going to make goal. Well, the leaders had gotten stuck, and we didn't know it. So we started gliding towards goal, and we got low again. We just got drilled. We're like, oh no, and so ended up climbing back up there, and little Pete didn't get it. And Hanning was coming in pretty tall. And so I kind of made a decision there. It's like, I better run, get the end of speed, and hopefully I'll get back up. So I went and tagged it, came back, and then landed, and was first in. And David thought that he got it. So he lands, and he's sending texts and whatever. And he's like, man, I've never won a task before. And I'm like, oh, dude.
Sorry.
Yeah. So that was a pretty fun one. We gave him a hard time for that. But yeah, that was one of the things with the buddies that was pretty fun. Me and little Pete pulling that off, and not expect, everybody got stuck, and we're like, where is everybody? It's kind of funny.
That is really fun when you think you're way off the back and you're in there.
Yeah.
That's a good time.
Yeah, that was a good one for sure.
So we were just hanging out in the Eagle. What do you call that place? Like
the shop.
The shop.
Yeah.
That place is awesome. So we were just hanging out there, and you were giving me your history and how you got into this. So you're down in LA working, and you come up here to the beach, and you see some people land, and you're like, I have to do this. What do you think it is about because people, you're in Santa Barbara, you're flying off the mountain, you fly over the town, you land on the beach, people do it every day. What is it about people like you that just gravitate towards this? What is it that just seized you and we're like, I have to do that. I gotta learn that.
Such a great question, and it's something that I've continued to ask myself, and I haven't been able to figure out.
Yeah, I haven't either.
You line up a bunch of people and say, what do all these people have in common? And, they look different, and they're different ages. And it's just, people either have it in them or they don't. It's almost like someone that, if you fly tandem, say, hey, I'd love to take you tandem. And, people are like stoked, or, oh, no way, there's no way I can do that. And so, I don't know. I mean, flying is such an archetype. I mean, Leonardo and those guys, if they had the proper materials, they would have been getting it. And it's it's something, you see it and you either have to do it. Some people just have to do it. But, sometimes it's a discovery too. I think that there's so many sports out there, base jumping, skydiving, wingsuiting. I think we get kind of molded into that whole, people don't know what we are until they see it.
Yeah.
And then, when we come out to the flight park there, people will be in a group of 5 people, and one person was that person that says, hey, I'm not going to do this with you guys. And then they see it and they're like, I didn't know this is what this was. Had I known this is what this was. So I just think it's part of it is people don't know what it is, but people that actually see it, like probably we both did, and most people see it, it's like, wow, I've got to do this. And then, and then the sky crack happens, as you said.
Yeah. The cedar sky crack.
That's right.
I love that term. So you see it, you're just totally addicted right off the bat. You were talking about Tom Truax, which he sounds like just a legend. I'd love to get him on the show. What has changed since those days? Like compare how you learned to 2019 over at the training hill now. That it cannot even been answered. Is that just too long? But what are the main changes that when you learned in the late 90s to what's happened now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing was something that we were one of the points we were talking about before this was the technology on all levels. I mean, obviously the gliders is the first one you think of, and how much more performance and the passive safety. But really just, I mean, like I was telling you, I started flying kind of before the internet, or right where it was happening. And Truax would get the phone tree going. You call these 5 people and I'll call those 5 people. So I think the technology of having someplace to post and the Telegram application that we use here in this community, or WhatsApp that people are using and tweeting and all that stuff really helps bring a community together and have everybody be on the same page. It just makes it easier for that collective to get together and go to church and go fly. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it. As far as the teaching and stuff, I mean, we definitely have refined things a bit and made discoveries. When I do an instructor clinic, I let everybody know that it's like, hey, I'm here to facilitate this clinic. I fully expect to walk away learning something from you. There's still stuff to discover. That's one of the beautiful things about it. There's still moves and techniques and knowledge. It'll just never end. It's just forever. It's infinite. So I think, there's definitely some stuff that the swap or break thing's not happen anymore. People are keeping their brakes in their hand, and
like some fundamental kind of stuff.
Yeah, fundamental stuff has changed. But I really feel like, the technology's helped a bunch, and I feel like more people there's more schools, and it's in more places. People are just seeing it more. But back to your question about what makes people want to do this, it's like I scratch my head here because they see us flying around and they see us flying out over town and landing at the beach. And it's curious that more people aren't just knocking on the door to do this. And it's kind of in you. And, maybe what it takes is some sort of educational thing to show people what this is and isn't, and to show it to them.
What do you think because the numbers nationwide, and I think really in the world, don't really back up what you're experiencing here. You're experiencing the best growth, and right? Are you experiencing kind of the best numbers that you've had right now?
For the sport in general here in the U.S., as far as students, or for our
Eagle, isn't Eagle kind of?
Yeah, I think for
sure.
You
guys doing probably as good or better than you ever have?
Yeah,
in terms of numbers.
We're continuing to grow, and it's better than it's ever been. Part of that is because of the community here, for sure.
Because I was just going to say, that isn't what's happening, in USPA. It isn't and it's not really happening, I think, worldwide. The numbers are static or they're down for the most part, except in places that are pretty dynamic. And, just in my 2 weeks that I've been here, this is really special.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to talk about how that's been. And I know you're too humble to be like, yeah, well, I know it's a community. But how have you fostered that, or how have the members of this community fostering that? Because it's a unique vibe.
It really is. It's a special thing. And I'll go into that, and I think I'll answer that first thing you said, because it's such a good point, is why isn't it growing more other places? And, part of it is it, and it's a philosophy that I've had that seems to make sense and is ethical, is, support those that are supporting you. If somebody's puts in the energy to start a school someplace, and they throw down for gear and a vehicle and insurance and radios and whatever they got to get off the ground, try to nurture them and support them with your business, and for that matter, anybody that's supporting you in the sport. If I had somebody that I trained and somebody else was giving them the continued support that person if they've got a school. It's like there's an incentive there to continue to kind of mentor and nurture and educate. And I think there's a fair amount of attrition because that might not be happening as much as it can. And sometimes it's not the solo school instructor's fault. You can't be everywhere at once. And there's tough choices to make there for a smaller school like that, to take the new people, or it's a good day to go fly the people that are ready to fly in the mountains because the weather's good. And, Truax always took us flying in the mountains. The new people, he's like, sorry, I got to get these guys up in the air.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's a tough balance there. And I think it's hard to find that balance. But it's part of the thing with folks. It's like we're in the Amazon era where you go online and you shop, and it seems like there's more, from a capitalistic standpoint, there's more online shops to buy paragliding stuff now, and maybe a little bit of pricing stuff happens. And there's not a lot of service happening there. It's easy to sell, and it's challenging to serve. Yeah. So if you, it points right back to you. If you're someone who's supporting someone in your small community, it doesn't really apply too much to me here because we've got a bunch of staff and big instructors and that type of thing. Granted, we want the support for those we support, but I think it's really critical for a smaller school that's just one person or a couple people, that the community really tries to support them. Hey, they're the people that are out making sure the LZs stay open and mowing the grass at the park and doing everything that kind of makes that community stronger. And if that goes away, it might not be noticed until it's too late.
Mm.
So I think some of that, the follow-up of continuing education can lead to attrition. We have a really good thing where we still are there for our students, but there's a lot of people in our community that play that mentor game, which kind of leads into your thing about this community.
Yeah.
So that's something that would help the attrition statistic and help nurture those communities and help those schools stay successful and have the sport grow.
Right.
But here it's just all about the vibe of these people, and the stoke level, as you said, is just higher than it's ever been. Part of it's the technology. We're all connected instead of the phone tree, but a lot of it's just, the hang gliding, paragliding. There's no gap or distance here between those two groups. And, Little John, our Sage hang gliding club board member, has been the person leading the charge for decades, and shown us the way on that, and made sure that we've kept our sights and been the point person on that. And then just people stepping up. I mean, I mentioned that, we could go to a work party at launch for a paragliding launch. There's more hang gliders helping than paragliders.
Yeah.
And, you and Rev is flying yesterday, and on Telegram, it's like, hey, who's on chase? Who's going to get these guys? And I mean, that's where the stoke level, somebody has a big day. I mean, Marty Divietti has a big day going flying. He's driving the van the next day. He's like, I'll chase today.
Right.
So it's that kind of vibe that just starts feeding off of itself, and people get it. And then there's like all these little subcultures within that, the OTB crew, people really starting to send it and go over the back and do stuff. And the slogans, the go to know, you gotta go to know. I mean, right. Be ready and go to know. It's,
yeah, there's a real optimism. There's a real positivity, and it's not careless. That's what's really unique about it. There's I even heard very recently, in the last couple of days, I was talking about this. I was just like, hey, you guys, this is kind of hitting me full frontal here. Like, what is going on here? It's because I lived in Santa Barbara long before I flew, and Santa Barbara has that vibe. It's just people are really happy here because it's amazing. It's stunning. You're out on the ocean. You got these beautiful mountains. I mean, I get that, but I was talking about, like, what are you guys doing to nurture this and curate this and, make it grow? And one of the guys was saying, he was a pretty new pilot, but he was like, it's just, it's different. When I go up to the Sierras, it's all about fear. It's all about, and they were talking about, there's the Cody Tuttle's up there, a new guy, and he's just stoked. And he's like, let's do this, because there was this real period there for like 10 years, kind of between hang gliding and paragliding. It's just like, you don't fly there in the summer, really, until Dave Turner showed up and was like, no, man, you can fly here all the time. And, but I think there's still this kind of like, and we have that at Sun Valley. Like when people come, we're always like, careful, man, careful. But you got to be pretty careful here too. But there's this real openness, I think, with sharing all the knowledge, regardless of where. And I saw it with Mitch and other people. They tell you about what they think about the day, whether you're a P1 or P4. They treat everybody like this is a playground. And again, it's this weird, like, they're not being careless. Be like, yeah, man, just send it, just go deep in there, But they're encouraging. It's a cool balance.
It is. And Mitch has definitely been the leader on that. He's been a guy, getting a talent like him to come in to be part of the team and teach from the new people to guiding people and stuff has just been a huge part of our growth and success and the community vibe. He took that leadership position. Yeah. I mean, he basically gives you that energy and tells you the truth that you can take to any flying site. And, it's all about the debrief. And, he lets you know that, everybody's got an individual decision to make up here about flying today. But you kind of nailed it with that whole fear thing. I mean, there's plenty of that to go around, it seems like.
Sure.
So let's nurture the other side of it and keep it positive. Mitch leads by example, but he's someone who he's earned the ability and the knowledge and stuff to do the bigger flights. And he lets people know that. And trying to get people to check in with themselves a bit on that and causing people to think that way. And so he's been a huge part of that. And I think that that's key. I think that having someone who is up there and even talking to people on the way up in the van, you don't talk about for people when you got to be there for the lowest common denominator. And so it gets communicated. It's not like something like that happens like, hey, you guys shouldn't have been talking about that with those first high flight people. That's not what they needed to have in their RAM headspace for their first launch.
Sure.
And so that'll get nipped in the bud, and it won't get swept under the rug in a graceful way. And there's communication about stuff happening like that on Telegram in the, with 300 people, 350 members or whatever we have now. Mitch just jumped in last week or a couple of weeks ago on a comment that, and he's so great about that. And, he's been someone who came in here and has who's definitely taught me a lot about a lot of things. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's about, we make suggestions. There's no ego involved with folks. It's just like, boom, boom. Hey, let's share this information. Kind of like I was at the Columbia tours when we're down there, and Shapiro's talking. He was down there guiding with us this year, and all the guys, Turner. I'm taking notes at the thing. I mean, there's always stuff in there that you either forgot or you didn't know or that needs to be an affirmation. So there's obviously Mitch makes a living as a paragliding guide instructor, but a big part of what happens here is the community of people that are just stoked to share the energy and see people doing better. There's a huge amount of mentors here that are happy to do that and just naturally do it. And it's not like, I don't want to jeopardize my flying day and focus on this. They do enough. They walk the LZs and they talk about flight plans, and everybody's talking and sharing. It's like when you have an experience, whether it's a great one or it's one that's not so great, you got to share that with the community so that we can all learn from it. So that culture's sort of been nurtured. There's so many lessons to learn in life, and we can't learn them all alone. And the same applies for flying. So, this community is really good about doing that stuff and owning it and sharing it. And that helps. Guys like Aaron the Plant, Kraka.
Yeah.
He's, for a community to have an individual like that who just volunteers so much time to what he does. He organized a comp here for a couple of years called the SB Hoedown, which is just a month-long task, and people can download it. It gets people to know how to use their instrument and the strategies for racing and that type of thing. And, he's got to score that and do that. So just a huge amount of effort for him on that. You got to come to the awards ceremony of that at the flight park. And the other thing that he's done that has been just super huge is his Crack-A-Sauce, his YouTube channel, Crack-A-Sauce. And he got a commendation for that. And it's really where the future of learning is, in my opinion. I mean, he just is on there talking about this area, and whether you're a local or you're a visiting pilot, you can get the beta and you can watch it again and do that little bit of pushing the envelope a little bit on each and every flight, and you get more comfortable with stuff, and know things, and then the answers are there for this community. There's a template there, along with, of course, Tom Truax's flight logs, but the whole video, that's where everything's at. Now you can learn so much and you can log in. So I feel like the hang gliding community is a huge part of our paragliding success, just because they're so cool and they're so stoked on flying. They're still out there flying, but it's just all the members of the community. One of our hang gliders is Mike Harrington's the biggest supporter of organizing the events and bringing chairs. And it's just, so it's part of that. And it kind of gets like a snowball. It seems like it's growing. People come here like you. And like you said, it's just
mind blowing.
Yeah. It's just like, wow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of elements there, but it's the collective. I mean, Will Gadd talked about the collective when he did the Canadian Nationals years ago up there. He's like, hey, everybody's, this is a group thing here. We've all got to do our part. And if you do something, you mess up, we're going to throw you in the river. We don't have a river, but once in a while we've got to throw somebody in the river, but yeah, so it's a special deal for sure.
Yeah. It needs to be, I think that's how communities work. I think it's just going to get naturally exported. People come in like myself and see this and go, man, this is what, I can bring this home to our club. And, I think of our club as a great little club, but it makes you realize you can really, I think what you guys are doing is folding people in. You must take people, very new pilots from the training hill, and you wind them in, and suddenly they're going up the mountain and they're going off a 4,000 foot launch. That's pretty awesome.
It is. And I think they're able to go further and get more confident and acquire knowledge and experience because of the community being there, for sure. Mm-hmm. They're just more available to them. I mean, somebody blows a launch and has a great 3-hour flight. It's real easy to talk about the flight, but it's great when somebody comes up and says, hey, let's talk about that launch. And so you kind of keep it real and share that stuff as a group. And that's all a big part of it. And so definitely everybody's feeling good about the community and what's going on. And and really we realize how special it is. And so we all are doing everything we can to nurture it and keep it going. It's a collective community effort for sure.
You wanted to talk about risk management. Let's take it from there into, it's not the darker side. It's just, this is a dangerous sport, and we've got to manage that risk. If you guys developed systems, how do you teach risk management not only to your students but to your newer instructors? Is there a real set program? Because you're dealing, like you said in the beginning, you're dealing with people at totally different ages, different histories, different backgrounds, different color skin, the whole thing. People are different.
Yeah, it's a great question. When somebody shows up at the hill, part of the fun of being an instructor is trying to write the prescription or the recipe that's going to give that person success, depending on where they're at and how they learn. And it's that constant evaluation during those first moments and the first couple days of teaching that we obviously go over, and we share tricks with each other of how to deal with certain types of personalities. And, there's certain people you need to kind of encourage, and there's certain people you got the bit in the mouth and you're pulling back.
Yeah.
So there's definitely stuff that we share with respect to that, to really how, hey, this is an individual thing. And that, that kind of gets passed on all the way up to where someone in Mitch in the mountains in a lead position is really getting people to kind of check in with themselves on where they're at, their experience, how they're feeling on a particular day, a good night's sleep, are they hydrated, any of that kind of stuff. So yeah, our thing here is, for me, risk management with my staff is just sharing experiences. There's obviously all the textbook stuff that we go to SIV clinics and we learn that stuff. That's a great way to be more informed and to practice what we need to be ready for in the wild. But my whole take on, and I've had to step back and look at the whole risk management. I've had people that have lost their lives that are friends of mine that have paraglided.
Mm-hmm.
But when I step back at it after those events, and I analyze things and just stepping back and looking at it over the years, I realized that whether you're a snowboarder or a rock climber or a road biker or skateboarder, anybody that has kind of a serious injury in those sports, head, neck, back, pelvis, is getting hurt close to the ground. If you're skiing in the trees, people hit their heads on trees, and, the hard drive can't be reset on that one. And people falling from rocks, most of the people I see in the community here that are limping around with their arm in a sling is from mountain biking or something else.
Yeah, right.
So we think about risk, and we have the luxury to get away from the terra firma, from the thing that can hurt us. Granted, we can fly into another pilot and have a midair or plane or that type of thing. But when you think about it, when we're up there, gaggle flying is kind of a different scene. There's more danger there, but there's nothing to smack into up there. So, I tell people on our tours, it's, during our opening talk, I say, I'll bet anybody here that a majority of the incidents, if we have incidents on this, when we're in the risk management topic, again, we're not fear-based when we're down there. There's a lot of other stuff we're talking about, but we do want to have that short talk.
Sure.
It's like, it's going to be from landing. And my experience, as far as risk goes, has been people get hurt landing. That's just been my experience. Whether you're talking about people that are doing the X Alps, or you're talking about somebody that's out at our flight park, or you're talking about somebody just landing in our local LZ or on the tour, it's landing. Mm-hmm. And so, trying to break that stuff down into just like super basic form. Obviously, landing in a vol-biv situation, you might be landing in windy conditions or some uneven terrain. And so there's stuff that you need to practice to be good at that. Good reason to get back to the flight park, even as that level of pilot, and practice that stuff. But, thinking about the fact is with the landing is that as long as you're flying straight on your landing, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. Mm. People have caught wingtips on trees landing and fallen from 20 or 30 feet. But a lot of the stuff that I've seen over the years on landing is self-inflicted.
Totally.
So it's almost like if you come to a small LZ, on a cross-country flight, or you kind of put yourself in this spot, as a paraglider pilot, you got to realize that bushes and trees are your friends. Mm-hmm. And, it's only after the fact, if somebody tried to put it into a tight spot and they spun their glider, or they turned close to the ground and they broke their ankle or broke their back or pelvis, that it's like, man, I wish I was hanging in a tree right now instead.
Totally.
So that's one of the things. There's so much stuff that's so instinctual for us that seems to be, there's so much that's counterintuitive with paragliding, but the intuitive part sometimes is just like, I got to land in a field. So, make friends with trees and bushes. And, if I'm setting up at a small site like that, I'm setting up and I've got my spot that I'm going to try to hit. But I've also looked past that and said, there's my bushes or there's my tree. And I'm so okay with landing there. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be fine. I don't know anybody who's landed at or a bush or tree who's anything too serious happened to them. Right. Maybe climbing out of the tree, don't fall out of the tree. So the landing is huge. And, there's a couple of, other things where with landing where people, if they're coming in at high altitudes and the ground's moving by faster than they've ever seen before, or they're coming in on a downwind run, it's natural and intuitive thing to be like, I don't know if I can run this fast, so let me slow this whole package down to make it so that I can run. But when we stop back and as we both know and think about it, it's going to be a harder landing, but it's counterintuitive and it's almost instinct. So talk about that stuff. It's like there's a couple things that you got to do. I mean, obviously landing in a boulder field or a cactus field or a river, landing, that's not good. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about just landing, as long as you're flying straight, you're doing good. And then one of the things that Mitch kind of was one of the things that he brought up was that it's good, get out of that seat early and really be in that athletic position where you're almost leaning forward like an eagle. Yeah, like when you're launching. Yeah. And torpedo, eagle, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. That's going to put you in a place where your body weight's not behind your feet. Yeah. And you got to parkour with the ground. You got to roll it out and do whatever you got to do. But it's much better to have ankles and knees having stuff happen than have coming in and letting your butt hit or having all that weight behind your ankles and knees. Yeah. So practicing that. And so that's kind of the big thing is we get into flying and people have a certain amount of time to fly, especially if you got a 9-to-5 job and the weekends of your time. Man, you got to try to get out to someplace and work on those fundamentals after a flight or instead of a flight sometimes, just to polish that stuff up. And man, it's so hard to turn down a good day to do that. And, some people don't have a great flight park to do that. Go to a place that has a place like that to train. Make a trip about doing both because it's super important. So flying straight, being friends with trees, no turns close to the ground, and you're pretty good, really. Yeah. And, the other half of the equation there is, of course, launching. That's the other time you're close to the ground. Sure. And there's only a couple things there. And number one is when anytime you're in the forward position and you run off a hill with your feet on the ground, it's better to have too much brake than too little brake on. The worst thing that's going to happen is that the glider is going to come back down behind you and you'll get reset again pretty quick. Mm-hmm. And then if it gets ahead of you, who knows what's going to happen? You can tumble, half the wing can fly, pick you up and put you back into the hill. And then my big one on launching, and this is something I really talk about in my ground school that happens to pilots of all levels, this pluckage thing. Yeah. It just happens. I mean, the Kishida, and so part of it is really breaking that down like you're talking about with the instructor teaching it and the student understanding it. And part of it is understanding why that happens and when it happens. It happens when the wind's up, usually above 8 or 9 miles an hour. You're more likely to get plucked if you're on a steeper slope, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can identify those two things and be like, it's ripe for pluckage now, let me visualize my launch. That's another Mitchism. I mean, he's big on that, and it's the truth. Yeah. Let me visualize what my launch is going to look like here. And what's my footwork going to look like here? People need that pluckage thing. I mean, it's got some people. I've been there to see it get some people, pay the ultimate price. And I've heard, students from Hong Kong, calling over going, no, man, we had this guy over here. And so it's one that can get you. I mean, and you can get away with it. As Tom Webster always said, Murphy's Law doesn't apply to paragliding. Everything that can go wrong does not go wrong.
Right. Totally. Yeah. How often do we get lucky? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think about that too. Like my first takeaway after the 2015 X Alps, so I've just completed the X Alps, like I've got some hours and, I got so much to learn, that was the main takeaway. But the big one for me was that, man, I need to work at the training hill a lot more even. It was like, yeah, okay, I'm in the X Alps, but man, I got to do a lot more acro. I got to do a lot more into the hill top landing, like the fly on the wall thing. And I mean, you get that timing wrong, you're going to break a couple legs. And you're doing it in that race all the time, the old hang glider style and stuff. And that takes a lot of practice, but you don't want to practice that on a 4,000-foot mountain in wind. You want to practice that at the training hill. And it really brought back for me, like, man, you got to work on this stuff no matter what level you're at. And then to me, like, the pluck thing is, if you've trained for that stuff, then, like, if you're going into that kind of situation and you're confident, it makes all the difference. If you're like, man, I don't know if I have this move, you probably don't have that move.
That's it.
You could get lucky 9 times out of 10, but that's the thing in this sport. It only takes once. And
you got to be ready.
Yeah, you got to be ready. And the only way to be ready is to have done that on the training hill in high wind over and over and over and to know it. I mean, there's that famous video of Kriegel launching in the X-Pier, and it's blowing at least 40 miles an hour, and there's another X-Pier pilot right there, and he's like looking at him like, you're not going, dude. And do you remember that? He pops that wing up and just catapults backwards for like 50 feet, just steady, just has it. He knows he's got it because he's trained in 60-kilometer-an-hour winds in the snow where he can take beaters into the powder. He's done it over and over and over again. So he knows he's got that move. Like when he walks up there, he's like, yep, this is a wind that I can manage. Not many people can manage that kind of wind.
No, and not enough people can manage it in just a little bit of stronger conditions. Mm-hmm. And not enough people are thinking about, like, hey, I'm going to do a reverse launch here and the wind's up. This is a situation. Yeah. There's some wind here. This is a situation where I could get plucked. The remedy is being ready. Yeah. And so you get out to the hill, and it kind of links up with the SIV training in the sense that a lot of what's being taught out there is like sorting out your glider is not the first objective.
Right.
It's getting a heading and getting the glider flying in any of those situations, whether it's cravat or whatever it is. It's like, let's get a heading. And when that happens on a launch or near launch, you're getting time. If something happens on a launch like pluckage and you just start dealing with trying to get untwisted, the glider's probably going to be in a turn and turn you back into terrain. I mean, thankfully, most of the time, the thing just unwinds and you're okay. But, like you said, that's part of the deal. Get out to the training hill. And so we get people on the rear risers. We get them. We want it to happen to them at the hill when they're kiting, so they see what a crummy feeling it is. You've got that hang point there is kind of on the beaners, which is, if looking at the median line of your body from the profile, there's just the connection points out front. There's just more weight on the back side. It's going to put you back, and when you fall down, you got a brake in your hand. Sometimes you're going to put that out naturally and turn the glider. So quick like a cat. If you feel yourself being plucked, get turned around. You were planning on going flying. It's just happened a little earlier than you anticipated, and fly the glider. Being ready, like you said, for that, like Kriegel is, and being able to grab the rears. And it starts with kiting. It also is grabbing the brake lines above, because if your risers are twisted up and you can't identify the rears and grab the rears, you've got to use those brake lines. Yeah. And get so good at kiting that way that you kind of go to the little back part of the hill and start getting lifted off the ground, and you're not really ready until you can actually launch backwards and you're comfortable flying off the hill backwards. And you got to build up to that in baby steps. You don't want to just get out there and try it right away, but being ready for that is huge. There's so much of taking those little pieces and going to the hill and working on that, like you said, even for a Red Bull athlete. So yeah, for the launching, that's kind of my big one, is the pluckage. And the thing is realize that you can use your feet. It doesn't matter if you're using the A's in each individual hand, or you've got the A's here with the A's and C's or whatever. You still want to be moving your feet. And you really want to, if you can, to get that pace that the wing comes up to kind of be the same every time. Develop some consistency there. If that thing rips up too fast and you got to check it with brake, you're going to get plucked.
Yeah. But if you run fast, you got it.
Yeah. Some people can't move that fast. So, if you're someone that's 68 or whatever, it's like, then, maybe you got to hold off or not go on that day, or figure, get a spot or figure something out. That's close to the train, launching and landing. And those are the big ones. The only other one is every 360 starts out as a figure 8, whether it's on launch or whether it's on a cross-country flight and you come in and you got to be close to the terrain, you can't count on that climb that you get there on that spine to where when you start pointing to the terrain to continue to climb.
Man, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was one of the first things I learned. So I did my P2 out with Santa, and then one of the next stops was here with you. I was with Randy Campanor. We were on a little road trip up the coast, and which was so cool. This is like one of the first places I flew here, but the one of the things that I learned back, so this was 2005, I guess, 2006, is don't turn into the hill, and that's still getting people all the time, man. They get a ripper right off launch, and they turn and they hit all that sink right behind the thermal, and they drop. They're like, I just didn't know I could drop that fast, and they pound.
Yeah, it's one that we see at our flight park with experienced pilots, and maybe it's because it's the training hill and it's this big green grassy knoll and it's not the Rocky Mountains. Rocky terrain, I should say. But yeah, I had a SoCal Open that Mackler put on like back in the day. I had an experience where I was stuck and two people passed me and below me. And I'm like, man, and I went to where they're at and I wasn't getting up and I got impatient. And, I was pushing a little bit away from the hill going, I'm going to have enough room to bring this around. And, I cut it close. I swooped in with some energy and I probably cleared the terrain by 5 or 6 feet with some energy. And the adrenaline just went, and then, then you get the buffer adjustment.
Yeah. Another 100 feet.
Yeah. Now you're talking to yourself, what are you doing? Nothing is worth this, And so, people have that. But it's one of those things where, again, you got to talk about it and realize that you have to assume, as you're looking back at the hill, you got to assume that you got a tailwind and you're going to hit the worst sink that you've ever hit. Are you still going to clear the hill by 100 feet or 150 feet, whatever your safe number is? And, you got to be religious about that. And it's just, you have that happen once and you got a buffer. Yeah. But hopefully it doesn't happen and you don't clear the hill and smack in. That's a tough lesson.
I think it is one of those. It's like backcountry avalanche stuff. You can do all the courses and be really diligent, but until you get in a situation, it's really hard to learn. And that's one of those, like the turning with the hill, because you can get away with it over and over. You're in the rising air and you over and over and over and over again. I had the same thing the last day of the Sierra Safari with Nick and all those guys, and I hit the ground with a lot of energy, and it was right in between these two boulders. I mean, if it wasn't just pure luck, and I just walked away, relaunched, and kept going. And I've never done it since. And it just reset everything. And so it's but if I hadn't had that, if I hit the boulder. With all that energy,
it's a big one. I mean,
that gets a lot of people.
It does, man, and it's this. My handle for everybody's got their radio handle here in Santa Barbara. Mine was SA, which is not like SA. It's not that. It stands for situational awareness. And Truax gave it to me after I landed deep and did something stupid. Like I think it was only in sport for 4 months, but I had a 9-hour hike and. I was stumbling out of there dehydrated and I was done. But you got to have that and you got to have that buffer. And, you kind of got to reevaluate the day as the day goes on. If the clouds come in and it shuts things down a little bit, maybe you're willing, and it's not windy, maybe you're willing to get a little closer to the terrain on certain days. And you got to kind of always do that reevaluation. Where's the day at? I mean, flying into different valleys that have different winds and, around the world, but on kind of a basic level, it's like you really got to evaluate the day and evaluate how close you're willing to be to the terrain. And so that figure eight, every 360 starts as a figure eight. And the end of that is that on a landing final approach, you got to kind of assume the same thing. You got to assume that as soon as you make that final turn, you're going to hit sync. Are you going to clear the pendulum or whatever it is on the turn on that? And if it looks like you're not, don't continue the turn and force it into the wind. Just stop turning and fly off the wind line. It's going to be the lesser of two evils for sure. And then, my other big from the risk management thing, really the last kind of my heavy hitting thing on it is the reserve parachute. It's one of those things that people maybe get to practice at an SIV. And we, of course, talk about it anytime you have your reserve repacked. You should always be in the simulator pulling it out instead of just handing off your reserve, or saying, here, repack this for me. It's an opportunity to practice that, just like every landing is an opportunity to practice a spot landing, no matter how big the LZ is. So the reserve thing is something where, and Mitch's visualization thing, it's like, let's visualize this thing and let's talk about this thing and let's realize that we need to celebrate the reserve toss. It's all pot. No one's ever going to say to you, why did you throw your reserve?
And they always work.
Yeah, they always work, man.
They always work.
That's the thing. I don't know anybody who's thrown their reserve and has followed the proper protocol, which is getting out of your harness and, working disable the wing, that's had something serious happen.
Yeah, you get an ankle or something.
Yeah.
I mean, they work.
So there's people that obviously that we both know that it's like, man, if they'd have just thrown. And so that's happening too much. And people need to make that an instinct and be comfortable with it. And maybe it's a thing where with reserve clinics that we have to have a dummy reserve and have people doing it all the time and just throwing and knowing and throwing and dealing with all these what if scenarios. What if my handle can't come? We'll use two hands or pull this way, and just make it this thing and talk about it a lot and talk about it at every clinic you do and just kind of put that out there and encourage people to go through it at the SIV, because you're right, they do work. I mean, when I was down in Mexico at the World Championships as the team leader in 2009, there was, I think, 26 deployments. And that was when the wings, you could fly, uncertified gliders back then. There was stuff blowing up. But everybody who threw, I think the guy from Japan sprained his wrist or something.
Right.
So they work. And that's something that people really got to get. You got to use that thing. You got to be willing to use it. Don't hesitate. It's not going to let you down.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Is I think that the thing I saw in Valle this year is it was just classic Valle. It was strong, it was windy, it was on, it was great. And, there was a lot of incidences. And what I saw was that, SIV over the water with a dude in your ear is not Valle, man. It's just, that's a totally different ball game. Yep. You're not instilled, and what I like that you've instilled here is that everybody here talks about training. They're not going to just fart around in the sky. They're all taking it like, we got to go. You got that place in the evening. They go over here and they top land and they ridge soar and they make little games and stuff, and Sage. And, everybody's talking about training. And I think that's the recognition is that we all know that SIV is awesome. Right. And you should be doing it as much as you possibly can. But that is not 5 meter a second conditions. You spin your glider in a big wound up thermal 300 feet off the ground. You do not think you throw, man, you huck, you're not recovering that, And so it's a different ball game. It's a very different situation that's hard without a lot of hours. It's the only way to get it is hours.
That's it. And, when I'm talking about the whole risk management thing, out of everybody that I've known on our tours and flying here, visiting our students, visiting pilots, our students, it's like nobody's fallen out of the sky that often compared to people getting injured on launching and landing.
Sure.
So believe me, I'm all about SIVs. I think they're great. But I think people are like, I got to go do an SIV clinic. I'm like, yes, you do. It's a great thing to do. But you've also got to go work on your fundamentals and be ready for some of this other stuff and think through some of this stuff. This whole fact that the ground is what's going to get you, and have your game together in all the variables that are close to the ground.
Sure. So let's talk about this guy. Those of you listening, I just pointed in my head, risk management and the mental side. Like I heard, I'm just constantly learning. It's so cool. But 3 days ago, everybody went up and it sounded like the air was a little ratty early, and I was doing a hike down by Franklin. So I heard about it, but Revis is an amazing pilot. That dude's on, right?
Yes.
And he just flew right to Parma. He was like, I just didn't like the risk reward. But the other thing he says, he's got a rule that if he screws up 3 things before he launches, he's not flying, and he was kind of like 2.5, like he forgot to bring his phone out of his pocket to put it on the thing. Something else like he hadn't turned on, it's minor stuff, but to him, it's like, that's a that's a tick in the box, like something isn't right up here. I'm not thinking really clearly. So what a cool system. It's great because when we're a little bit stressed, a little bit tired, a little bit dehydrated. Maybe we've had a couple too many beers the night before, whatever. Like there's a lot of those times where it's just like, man, I don't know if I'm really here that well. When I was first learning, when I was first getting my P2 out with Santa, it was like the last day and I was getting my little mountain flight, and it was wicked hot in summer and baking. And Jeff was kind of watching me and he could tell that I was kind of like forgetting if do I turn right or do I turn left? And I was kind of having a hard time hooking in and stuff. And he just came over and put his hand on my shoulder and he's like, "You're done today. You're all over." And I couldn't recognize it, but he could just, like, hey, so how do you guys foster that or teach that? I mean, no, I know there's a lot of different levels, but
that's a great point. And it's something that I've seen that 3 rule. There's people that I know if the 3 rule thing would have been happening, they wouldn't have had their event. Yeah. Mitch started developing this buddy system thing, which I think is pretty cool too. We've always had the culture of checking each other's stuff out at launch when you're getting ready. Hey, is your thing? Don't be afraid to say something. Is your correct riser on top? Checking making sure people's leg straps are hooked up. So that 3 rules are broken thing. I mean, I definitely know people that have skipped that one and being rushed. Typically when people are in a rush, if you're in a rush, you're in the wrong headspace. Yeah. So I mean, we have to share all that stuff and communicate that stuff in ground school and then continue to communicate it and be, as an instructor, we've talked about that at the flight park, especially. We get a lot of one-day people up there that are doing their first day and they're just so stoked. And we have to be looking for what Santa noticed in you that day. That's one of the big ones. So it's one of those things with that whole check in with yourself, self-awareness thing as a pilot, but also for people that aren't awake enough or aware enough to help themselves to be able to step in and say something, whether you're an instructor or not. That's one of the things that sort of needs to be encouraged is if you think you see something, say it. I remember when I was only been flying for 1.5 years or so, and I saw a guy flying at this spot where it was kind of a ridge that kind of did this elbow and it was getting more cross. And I kept saying to him on the radio, "Hey, don't be flying over there. It's getting more cross." And after saying it a few times and sounding a little bit like a broken record, I kind of said, "Hey, maybe I should mind my own business. And I'm not an instructor and I don't know what I'm talking about." And he ended up having an event and going in. And I'm like, and I've seen that with other people. It's like, if you see somebody flying too deep in the brakes, in a graceful manner, say it. And it's something that they need to hear and at least have some dialogue about it and bring somebody else that's an instructor in to talk about it. So, I mean, it's definitely something that we're looking for, the fatigue factor for sure and the focus factor. And if you see somebody moving fast and being kind of twitchy on launch and they're nervous, it's like, hey, and we try to, as instructors at the hill and in the mountains, we talk a lot about being in a physical space to do something, meaning as a person there to help and guide. Not only were you assessing the conditions, but if things go bad on a launch, it's like, let's not see how this unfolds. Let's stop it and grab onto a riser and bring them down. Be in a physical space where you can do something. If you are up at the flight park and somebody takes off on a first day thing and you're on the radio going, go right, and they're still on the ground running and they're going off in the canyon, you messed up as an instructor. You got to be in front of them between where they're going and to be like, hey, let's just bring this one down. And same thing can be said on the mountain. There's a certain point when you kind of step away from people, but why not be there to stop pluckage on someone new or when the conditions are ripe? And, we kind of communicate with the pilot or student saying, hey, I'm here. I'm not going to do anything. Am I making you uncomfortable? I'm going to be here to just kind of support you if you need something, but pretend I'm not here and focus on the task at hand. And, to really be in their body for the launch, be grounded. You got to be grounded before you can fly. You can't have that tempo up and that nervous energy going. You got to be grounded and in your body before you fly. And one of the big ones with respect to the buddy system and self-awareness and the pre-flight check is the leg straps. Thankfully, all these modern harnesses are building systems into them that prevent you from having a situation where you take off and you're not strapped in for the most part. But there's still some older harnesses and still some that don't have that. And I mean, I remember Greg Babush's pod took off at an Owens comp, 10 or so years ago. And it was ghost riding up there. I mean, it was thermaling back in the canyon with nobody. And people are coming on the radio, and Bernanke's like, no, there's no pilot in that aircraft, And he slipped out at 10 feet. He had good situational awareness and said, hey, I don't want to deal with this, and slipped out. And he had a soft, just rolled his ankle and was out for a few days. But that's something that I bring up, that weird what if scenario. I mean, there's been people who've lost their lives because they didn't do their leg straps.
Sure. Just happened in Colombia this winter.
Pilot Air. Yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Have people really thought about, I mean, like I said, the modern harnesses have systems and stuff, but have you ever really been in a simulator that's been lifted up higher than a normal simulator and hung from a harness and had both, see what that feels like to put yourself in that scenario? Mm-hmm. And what do you do? And I'd never really thought about it till some of those instances were put in front of me. You sit back and you think about it, what would I have done there? And that's just something, it's like, okay, let's practice this. You just don't practice it. I mean, you're going to sit in a simulator and do it, and that's about it. Mm-hmm. But it's something that has gotten people. Mm-hmm. After reflecting on it and hanging in one of those things funny, I mean, the whole thing shifts up and you've got some brake on. And my takeaways from messing around was I'm not going to give up my hold position of power to get more comfortable and try to be your hero and get back in the seat and be in a worse position. Because, the side adjustment straps are up here right by your ribs. They move up to under your armpits. Yeah. And you got brake on now. The whole thing's kind of moved up. So what I would probably do for myself is clasp my hands together and not lose anything and just fly the thing into some tree or some bushes at launch. And I don't know how long I could hang on for. But, situations like that are those just random what ifs, but you talk about them, try to figure out what you would do and pass that information along. And hopefully somebody who actually has that happen had thought about it and was ready. But yeah, in Colombia that happened. And there was, again, landing, the wind's coming and you're pushing the envelope in the afternoons down there. I think one of the girls was landing in windy conditions, a choice, right? The other one was someone took off from launch and let go of their brakes to get comfortable in their seat and wasn't there to be ready to grab the pressure and had a deflation and went in. So
it's never the gear.
It's never the gear. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And so taking some ownership there on that and just really having it. It's nice when it's not fun to talk about some of that stuff, but you got to talk about it to be ready for it and figure out what could have been done differently and what you don't want to do. And so I think Revis's three things is brilliant.
Well, I agree with you. I like it because it's something concrete and it doesn't change and you don't, because otherwise you let yourself out of stuff. That's a real concrete one. Wait a minute. I've done I'm over the limit now. And I think that's one of the things I'm enjoying the most about my flying now is that, you go through this phase where you're so hungry, like Logan right now is like, I'm pulling the wing out of the bag every day. Yeah. That's my thing. And that is awesome. Yeah. I dig that. That dude's going to be good. But what I'm liking about it now, like Nick Reese talks about like this, instead of getting that extra 20K, I'm going to the airport or I'm going to the burger joint, I just, there's a lot of times where I'm like, I don't have it. I don't need to push this like I did for all those years, and it's still just as enjoyable because Santa said this too. He's like, the big epic days will come and those are the ones you got to nail. And, you don't need there is a time where I had an Instagram message today and the guy said, hey, how much wind? It was after the post from yesterday going over the back of Franklin. And those of you listening, this guy, Revis and I, one of my supporters in the X-Alps had a really neat flight yesterday over the back here, which is pretty proper tiger country. Yes. I was really impressed. And it was really windy. And this guy asked me, like, how much wind are you willing to fly in the lee? And I said, man, it's just, you can't have a number. It depends on the day. It depends on how confident I am. It depends on what gear I'm in. It depends on just where I am. Am I current? Am I 300 hours into the season, or am I 5? I just, I've flown in horrendously, and I've flown in not so badly, and the not so badly scared me more than the horrendous. It just depends on your headspace. Depends on where you are.
It's so true. There's so much to evaluate for that question. There's so many variables.
So many.
And so the culture of self-awareness and checking in with yourself, and that's something that you probably got to practice too. It's not something that you naturally do. Mm-hmm. I had a bummer landing in Colombia. I mean, I didn't get injured, but it wasn't pretty, and I came down on my butt. And, after hearing Mitch's talk about visualization and stuff, it's like, you talk about doing that stuff, but do you actually go and sit down and do the yoga pose or do the meditation or whatever you want to call it, that is thinking about going through that? Yeah. And it's about doing that work. And I think Mitch does that kind of work. I think that's why he's seen the results that he's seen. He does a lot of different things, but from the mental aspect. And so I did it. I sat down and I did that. And I think it's, people want to grow and achieve these goals as pilots. And I feel like that whole mental side of it, and the debrief and the review and checking in yourself, is such a big part of it. It's kind of harder to do. There's not always a roadmap for that. But I think, it's like practicing the guitar. It's like 15 minutes a day and you can learn to play a few chords, You got to put the time in to nurture that part of your pilot portfolio. Mm-hmm. And realizing that, like you said, it's not time to push, it's time to go there. And that goes back to reevaluating all the time. I mean, there's times when I've been up there flying and I haven't been able to make sense of the air. And that's part of the reward, is being able to track that core and stay with it. And it's like, I can't figure any of this out. Mm. I think I'd rather be biking or doing something else. It's like, this just isn't fun right now. And you head out and you land and you live to fly another day. And yeah, like what Santa said, the good days are going to come. They're going to be there for sure. Yeah.
The last time we flew together that I remember, we've seen each other since, but like proper flying in the air, I think was Chelan in like 2012 or 2013. Cause I remember the bus retrieve with the big flight. That was at that time, the biggest one. And then they went even bigger like a couple years later, but that was an epic flight.
That was fun.
Out over the Palouse,
I think. So beautiful
that
time of day.
So cool. You were flying the Ice Peak, as I remember. I don't remember what harness you were flying, but take me through a little bit of gear. I know that you're a big shop and you import. And so I'm not really asking for the, like what brand, but like, what are you excited about when you've seen this revolution in gear from the late 90s and shark nose and just all the stuff that's happened? You talk about how much, that the gear has improved. When you're with your students, what wings are you excited about? What are you personally flying? Just talk about gear a bit.
Yeah, for the school, it's nice. I mean, if you're training on an older glider, you're working harder. And the students not having as much success if you've got 5 people out there. So it's really nice to get modern stuff out there with the whole Rigifoil revolution thing and stuff with the leading edge. I'm going away from Mylar. That leading edge is just so much lighter. Mm-hmm. And it's so nice for it to come up for them. And so it's, and it's important for the student as well to do well on their first couple pull-ups, be like, wow, I'm pretty good at this. I can do this. If they're someone that's like, really, I can fly solo today, my first day. That's just something that's so nutty about it here, is that, if you're going to go to a surf lesson, you're probably not going to show up within 2 or 3 hours and be up riding the wave for a minute.
Yeah,
your first day.
No way.
But you will hear in our training, you come, you show up, and it's like they're just blown. And after that first flight, they've got this look on their face. So the gear makes a difference for people like that. This modern gear, it gets them going faster and success sooner. The weight is just the coolest thing. And I've just sort of started to get on that train. I got a lighter pod harness now and a lighter reserve, and I'm like, oh wow, this is nice, And Mitch was tweaking on that stuff a bunch with the Red Bull X Alps and all that stuff going on. He's gear and light and stuff, but I think that's been a huge thing for people. The designers that I've talked to, Franta from UP, and what I've read and heard is that the lighter stuff is better for recovery and that type of thing. So that's positive. Yeah, and it's just nice. So I think that 27 gram material holds up pretty good. I'm waiting for somebody to make a light tandem, that's not just single surface.
Right.
That'd be, I think that'd be a hit. And there's some of them out there. Yeah, and just the whole the pod thing, the pod harness thing has really come a long way. I feel like the reserve thing is great too, but just the pod thing with the aerodynamics, and people are flying those, and there's more people doing it, and it's just comfortable and fun, and it feels good. We're obviously not having people not jump into two things at once, like a new wing and a new reserve. Just get used to something for a bit and get to know the pod or get to know the wing before you're jumping into that kind of stuff. That's a consideration. But yeah, just loving all the gadgetry. I mean, when we did that comp with Truax and Aspen back in the late 90s, I mean, we had 2 disposable cameras around our wrists, taking turns at turn points, taking pictures at turn points, it's like, this is crazy. And then, now with all these instruments, I remember the first time that, we got the Flytex with the GPS variometer integration with glide ratio, and you're going to arrive this high at the turn point. I'm like, this is like cheating, man. This is crazy, So that's been fun.
Yeah.
All the instruments, and it seems like the instrument game has just exploded. There's so many different brands out there and stuff like that. And there's so much going on with that stuff, and knowing how to work on it. That's why, we've always been with, Flytech. And after Steve Krupp, he's been so great with service and stuff. It's like, here, help us with this. And he's been really good about that. But there's just so much of that that's pretty cool. It's fun to see. And then the reserves, people, the Regalo reserve, the steerable reserve, and these new square designs are pretty cool. Charlie's got a steerable square now. And, my whole philosophy on the reserves, after seeing what we talked about seeing over the years, they just work. The whole keep it simple, stupid thing. Boy, when you see someone coming down under one of those Regalos, it sure is pretty cool. They're like, wow, look at, they're kind of flying along there for sure and stuff. I haven't ever really met anybody that's been like, darn, if Bill would have just had a steerable reserve, he would have been okay. I'm not saying that obviously has never happened, but in my experience, it's just about using whatever you got, get it out there. But you do notice with those square designs compared to the rounds, just the descent rate is much better for them. They're coming down slower and less oscillation. You see that up at the SIVs for sure. Yeah. People, they haven't been around for a very long time, and people are like, why didn't you sell me one of those? I'm like, they've only been around for a handful of years. They see the difference.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, and then, just the whole wing thing, I stopped saying years and years ago, it can't possibly get any better. It just does. And so I think it's great that there's so many brands out there succeeding and pushing the envelope with design and stuff like that. And some of these newer wings that have good performance with real passive safety, giving them the attention and the labor and the materials and stuff that the higher level wings have, given an END comp type wing love to a lower level wing. And it's got all this performance with all this passive safety with, a fairly mellow aspect ratio is pretty eye-opening. It's like, wow. So that kind of technology in those brands is pretty exciting to see. And I think maybe we'll see more brands doing that. They're more expensive because of the labor that goes into making them. Sure. But, you compare an A on one of those gliders that goes about as well as a high B. And so you can't compare the price of that A to the same A's. You got to compare it to the glider it performs like, sure. And the price of those. And the reason that those cost more is because there are more cells and there's more labor to go into them. But to see that happening, and you're paying an extra $400 or $500, is that $400 or $500 worth having all the performance of that glider and all the passive safety that comes with an A? People are, from what I'm seeing, people are saying, it is. The handling. I mean, my wife was flying a high B, almost a C, and she went to one of those that's an A. She went one of those type of gliders that's got that kind of love going into it. Wow. And she's pretty happy on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Having a good time.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. That's really cool. So what are the things, after all these years of instructing, flying, you've seen a lot of great and obviously some tragedy, as we all have. What are the things that you still see? What's like, if you could remove one thing from, just the most common mistake that you still see people make, what is it? what could you remove, like if you can talk to every paraglider in the whole world right now and you could give them one bit of advice, what would it be?
Good question. What's at the top of the list? It's not a specific thing. It's you have to keep your fundamentals polished. Mm-hmm. You know, the best guys, the best pilots that I know have been hurt doing basic fundamental things. And again, it goes back to the launching and the landing, blowing a launch or having a rough landing. I mean, if I'm going to prevent people from having, if that's what we're talking about, risk management and injuries, if we're preventing people, if that's what's the most important thing, which kind of is to me, mother hen, I don't want anybody getting hurt. It's about having fun, is keeping your fundamental balanced portfolio. It's not just about flying. It's your skills and your decisions and, an awareness that when you're close to the ground, you're in the red zone. You have to have hyper awareness. You have to be sharp. You have to have a code. Mm-hmm. You have to have a code when you're close to the ground, and you have to have a code on launch. Not getting plucked is a huge one. Having the 3 rule and being about a pre-flight and carrying enough brake on a forward run that you're going to be okay. And that's a pretty good solid. The percentages drop significantly there. And then on landing, I mean, flying straight, not turning close to the ground. The injuries that I've had I hadn't hurt my wrist. I mean, it was me early on in the sport, I compare it to being on a motorcycle and looking around and being like, wow, it's beautiful. And I was pretty close to the train and there was a line and I quickly made a thing. It was close to the terrain. It always is. It's not very common to fall out of the sky and have to have an issue where you get injured there. It's more common if you took a poll of everybody in your community. It's like, wow, it is. We all are having stuff that has happened close to launch and landing. Not to say that deflation can't turn into a cravat where you don't throw or doing a 360 too close to the hill. But man, the top of the list just has to be keeping your portfolio rounded to where your ground handling is super solid and you realize what's important on your landing. You realize what can get you on a pluckage launch. That's part of landing. And that's really, that's such a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Because we're up there flying around and there's nothing for us to smack into. And as long as we're ready to do that, we're good. It's the cornerstone or the foundation of risk management because it's where the most stuff happens. It's where the most stuff I've seen happen. And, when stuff happens and nobody pays a price, it's a great thing. It's almost good that it happened in a way. Nobody got hurt. We all learned from it. Let's all talk about it. But that would have to be telling pilots of any level. It's something that applies to a Red Bull athlete and something that applies to someone who just got their P2 or is getting their P2. And it's, I used to see people come out in our community that were great pilots who'd been flying for years, and the new students launch looked better than theirs. And you can tell that the conditions are a little cross or whatever. And they're up there just thinking, man, if I can just get past this launch, it's going to be a great flight. That's not where you should be, And I know it's hard to sacrifice a good flying day, but man, you get out there and start doing that stuff and you realize how fun it is to be out at the hill and playing with that stuff. And the windsock at the hill dictates what you're going to work on. If there's no wind, you practice forwards. How long has it been since you've done a forward? If it's real windy, you practice the pluckage. If it's about medium, then, maybe you work on spot landings. There's always something to pick depending on what that windsock is doing, to work on.
Yeah, that I'm glad you brought that up because it's and we touched on this before, but it was really interesting for me going to compete in the X Alps, coming out of it. It made me realize how much more critical that stuff, because you kind of go through the phase where you're working on all that and you're bringing the bag, the wing out of the bag every day. You're crazy about it. Every sledder is just a ripper, it's awesome. And then you get, I don't know, you're not jaded, but you just, you start chasing the bigger days. And if it's not a 100K day, I go mountain biking, and you just don't, and you start not doing the forwards and you start not doing the really hairy ground handling and you start not, doing enough top landing and that kind of thing. And, it's like for me, it's, you don't really work on top landing until you go do a bivy trip. And then you're like, holy hell, I'm really bad at this. I need to learn how to top land, but going to the X Alps made me realize like how many things were pretty built up okay, and a lot of things needed a lot of work, and it was like, yeah, going back to the training hill. Man, you go just step outside in the yard when it's blowing on the flat ground and the grass and farting around, making things go wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely some stuff for the X Alps that's you can work on some of it our training hill, but some of that's beyond. I mean, that's high level stuff, but you're right. Yeah. It's almost like you have to. I mean, I noticed you top landed the other day up in the mountains when we were up there filming that thing. And it's like, that's great practice for you to come in and be doing that. Yeah, do you do that a lot?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. I basically, for kind of the year before the race, I kind of dropped the whole like trying to send it, and I'll just try to send it in 5 parts, and just try to put it down in the middle of the day when it's ripping, not stuff I would ever want to teach somebody to, but just, I learned that from Hansa.
Yeah.
That dude can launch and land off anything,
yes.
like a cat, and that's what that race is all about. If you can't do that, you're going to bomb out and climb another 4,000 feet, or you can sit up there and wait for the cirrus to pass over and relaunch in an hour, save yourself a lot of energy.
It may be something you are teaching someday, who knows, down the road.
Yeah.
10 years from now, 15 years from now, people are going, go get with Gavin and he'll show you.
Well, what it made me realize was just that's hard to practice that. And it's easy to get hurt practice, doing that. So you just got it, but you got to do it. You got to practice it.
Yeah. And on that note, I try to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And so I don't want my students or newer pilots top landing in the mountains. I differentiate a top landing site. It's got to be only ridge soaring, and it could be near the ocean or somewhere in there. But then there's thermals mixed in. It's not a ridge soaring site anymore, because of that whole philosophy of the red zone. We want to get away from the terrain. Yeah. So I don't top land unless I'm doing a rescue and it's safe for me to top land. Yeah. Obviously, someone needs to have that in their portfolio if they're in the X Alps, and so you got to practice it. The rules can be bent there a little bit if the conditions are right for it and you've practiced it to top land for grabbing the van to drive it down. I'm always of the thing, it's like, hey man, I'll take you back up the hill. Unless you got it nailed and it's overcast and it's not windy, it's like, we just tried to get away from that when we did it. So let's stay away from it type thing.
No, I think it's, there's I think staying whole in the sport for a long period is eliminating undue risk. But what the X Alps does that's just scary, and if you don't do that, you're gonna get hurt in the race, because you're so tired and you don't get enough sleep, and so it's just kind of one of these things where it's funny, as course, I think it's just age and hopefully some wisdom, that kind of thing. I get more and more conservative, but I realize that, come June, I got to be in a headspace where you're invincible. You just have to be like really on your games. Otherwise you're going to suck.
You got to be ready. It's all going back to being ready. And you chose to fly this event, and that's part of the portfolio you need for that event.
Yeah, you need all that weird stuff,
and you can get good.
All that stuff you don't really want to encourage people to do.
Yeah, and you can get good at it. I'll encourage people to do it if they do it like this and practice up, and not try to do it once at the training hill and then they're doing it only in the mountains.
Sure,
so build up to that, and so only ridge soaring places for the students. It's like, hey, and you got to check at a ridge soaring site too.
Yeah.
You go up to Sandaller up at Big Sur, and, there's some people that have been worked coming in there, and you're kind of scratching your head and you're saying, why is there rotor here sometimes? It's hard to figure out. Mm. And luckily there were some pioneers that took some arrows at that site. That I land at the beach. If there's no beach at that site, I'm probably not going to fly because I'm not going to top land there. And I try to play it uber conservative and set the example. And it's like, I walk the walk, and I don't miss out on too much fun at all being that way. In
a lot of ways you're just missing out on intensity
and
stress. It's not, after the X Alps there's no more of that stuff. For sure. Well, maybe you've already answered this, but last question. And this is, you've heard the podcast, so I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but if you could rewind the clock, this would be going way back for you, but if you could rewind the clock to your 50-hour self, so like that first year, second year, or something right in there, you're out here, you're just learning with Tom. if you could have gotten some advice that you didn't, what would it be? Like what would you change if you could? Knowing how it's all kind of
gone. Yeah, good question. Something that we didn't have back then that we have now are those spots in the Delormes, or actually it's not Delorme anymore, it's Garmin, is fly with those. Man, if you're flying cross country, you got to have one of those now, don't you? I mean, it's so cool. But that's not really something that was available then. But I tell myself I didn't put myself in a position. So it's so different for everybody. Some people need the bit in the mouth. Some people need to be encouraged, but you do have situations where, one bad decision turns into a cascade of bad decisions. Mm-hmm. So kind of always have a plan A, which means always get to a landing zone. And that can be a landing zone that's small with some bushes around. It's like just always make sure you keep a spot to land within reach and not be thinking ahead on that. Always have a plan A. Taking off for a flight, every flight, it's like there's the landing zone if I don't hit any lift. And if I happen to get a climb, then I've thought about plan B. But as I get low, plan A's, I could have a new plan A if I'm not in that area. Mm-hmm. But just not getting to a point where you're doing rash decisions, just diving in places when you're green. Mm-hmm. That's going to come. And I learned a lot of that stuff just following Truax for years. The A team that was here following him around was just, it's like, really, we're going here? And, it's like you figure out that it works and you figure out what some of it doesn't work. And it usually worked with him. But learning from those guys and flying with mentors, it's like I would team fly and not be a lone wolf. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I would tell myself for sure. Okay. As I was, part of the reward of this sport is making decisions and flying far, and your reward is your proof is in the pudding, dude. You flew over 100 miles or you did this great flight. And, sometimes even on comp tasks, it's like you arrive at the end of the day and the guys that you were with made it and you didn't. You're like, man, I should have stuck with those guys. So there's a time when you got to kind of.
That sounds like discipline.
Yeah, exactly. You got to have discipline. You got to use the team, be part of that. And, you got to take your lead out of the climb once in a while and mark the next lift, but fly with other people, stick with other people. Don't be in a rush. Mm. As Greasy calls it, the big brain. It's like stick with the big brain, and there's a lot of smart people in that thermal. So fly with people.
That's a good one, and man, that's hard to learn.
Yeah, it is.
Depending on your personality.
Totally.
Holy, it's taken me years to get that one. Yeah. Come on, dude. Stick with the brain. Oh, I'm smarter.
I know.
No, I'm not.
I mean, once in a while you're rewarded and you've made the right decision. And if you're in the flow or the groove or whatever, you go that way sometimes and do it. Yeah. But man, you're going to get so much more out of slowing your roll and sticking with the crew and sticking with the team and team flying, especially in the flats. But yeah, that's something I would tell my 50-hour pilot self. It's like, you don't know everything. You're pretty good, but you don't know everything. You're not always right. It's like, sit back and learn something. Because the other thing about that is that when you do that, you have something to share at the end of the day. Mm. Whereas before, you're like thinking about it and debriefing yourself. If you take the time to do that, I mean, you're definitely reflecting on those fun moments of the day, whether it was a low save or a climb or when you got really high. But to be able to talk about those moments with a group of people and share what you saw them do and stuff, you get more.
You do.
Yeah.
And
we really try to teach that on our tours. We try to teach the team flying thing because you're just going to go further and do better and learn more with the team.
Ben was saying that last night on the way home because he had a wicked flight, and he landed. I wouldn't say he bombed out. It was just like, man, I'm on a glider. There's way too much wind. He made a really good call, basically, and landed out. And that the one move back. And got back to the truck and chased us down. And on the way back, Revis and I are just like, and then we did that, and then we did that. And he's like, man, I learned more from these retrieves. Like everybody should do retrieves all the time. He's like, I'm learning so much from this, and it's exactly like that's a good thing to volunteer for.
that's what's been happening in our community here.
Exactly. And people are hungry for it.
We try to get the new people. We're like, hey, it's not really flyable up for you today, but drive and you're going to be psyched. We'll buy you dinner and beer and you can get all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's such a part of, again, going back to that community thing. There's so much extra gravy that everybody gets to just being in that van and that pod of information and energy going up the hill to Stoke, and everybody's talking about the lapse rate and what they saw with the weather and what do you think and where are we going today?
Yeah.
And a new pilot's just going, this is cool. And he's listening, he's asking questions, he's just listening to conversations like Ben was listening to you guys talk about today and sharing it. So that's something I definitely would tell my 50-hour pilot. You should still do retrieve.
Yeah.
And you should team fly instead of being a lone wolf.
Sure. Yeah. I like it. I like it. Rob, thanks, man. Super honor. It's very special being back here, and it's special to see you, and I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for taking the time and energy to put this together. It's the same kind of future learning thing I'm talking about with respect to the cracker sauce and mayhem. I mean, this is where it's at. And thanks for taking the time to do it. It's huge it's global. It's beautiful. I won't stop listening, man. It's just great. Keep going, buddy. And good luck in Europe.
Thanks, man. Thanks, man. It's going to be fun.
Hope to see you here next winter.
You got it. Oh, I will be here. I got to figure out how to afford this place. I'm going to move here. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Was the color of the money in her hand. I hope you enjoyed that. Always fun to sit down with these great pilots in different parts of the world. Super inspiring. As always, all we ask for is $1 a show. If you're getting something out of the Cloud-Based Mayhem, there are many ways you can support it, either financially, through PayPal, and soon to be just directly through our website. We'll have details of that up pretty soon. But if you can't support us financially, we totally understand. This will remain free as long as we can do it. But you can support it in many other ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher or however you listen to your podcast. That really goes a long ways. You can blog about it on your own blog. You can post about it on social media, share it with your friends, talk about it on the way to launch. I know many of you are doing that. I really appreciate it. And another way you can support us is through our store. We've just got a whole new load of awesome Patagonia t-shirts for men and women, and a whole new box of super styly trucker hats by Recaps. Each one is totally unique. Got a whole bunch more colors that seem to be more in favor. So go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, click on the store link, and get some cool swag. That's another great way to support the show. But yeah, get behind us. We're doing this directly just through you instead of sponsors, because I just can't stand having that whole sponsor thing at the top of the show. And I want you to know that it's a authentic conversation. It's just opinions, and they're not being skewed by advertising dollars, which I think is a pretty toxic thing that's going on right now globally, with all the stuff going on with Facebook and others. So anyway, we'd like to do it direct. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.